P. Diddy leaves the Metropolitan Detention Center jail in Brooklyn. New reports say he was taken to the hospital for a few hours last week to get an MRI. We're just now learning about this, though, because Diddy was taken from the jail late at night, actually using the cover of darkness.
The moment Diddy walked into that prison, everything changed. The flash of cameras, the roar of reporters, the chaos of the courthouse, all of it faded into silence as those steel gates clanged shut behind him.
In the cover of darkness at about 10 p.m. on January 30th. He was taken to a Brooklyn hospital for an MRI after reporting issues with his knee. This actually isn't the first time we've heard about Diddy's knee either. He's apparently had problems with it since 2003 when he ran the New York Marathon. He even had multiple knee surgeries back in 2017. In a now deleted Instagram post, Diddy shared this photo and wrote, quote, "Just had my final knee surgery. They said I'd never run again. I said the devil is a liar, 2 exclamation points. 3 surgeries in 1 year. 3rd time's a charm, 3 exclamation points. Hashtag rebirth. Don't take the simple things in life for granted. Thank you to all the surgeons and docs and PTs. I thank God for y'all. And hashtag team love, hashtag thank you, hashtag God is the greatest." He also wrote, quote, "God puts us all through things for reason. It's up to us to learn through the things that he puts us through. Sometimes you have to go through the pain to get to the joy. This journey has brought me closer to God, closer to my family, and most importantly, closer to myself, as this has been God's will." So apparently Diddy's knee has been bothering him recently, so he reported it. At some point, it was decided that he needed medical care outside of the jail, so he was taken to a Brooklyn hospital. He was only gone for a couple of hours and came straight back to MDC after his MRI was finished. Diddy's attorney Mark Agnifilo told TMZ, quote, "I cannot comment on anything related to prisoner movements. Also, I'm not commenting on anything related to possible medical issues." A statement from the Federal Bureau of Prisons was released too. It says, quote, "For privacy, safety, and security reasons, we do not comment on the conditions of confinement for anyone in our custody, to include medical status or medical trips." Well, the Federal Bureau of Prisons may not be able to comment on all of this, but I do know someone who can. I'm going to bring in Dr. Dwayne Hendricks, a former corrections officer and deputy warden right there at MDC. Dwayne, thanks for coming on with us once again. You're a friend of the show and give us a great interview every time. And what I wanted to ask you about today is Diddy leaving MDC to go to the hospital. Is this a big undertaking?
Not necessarily. Only in the format that it happened with him leaving later in the evening. Typically, inmates are given a physical within the first 14 days of their arrival. And if there's anything that indicates that needs immediate follow-up, the medical team there will follow up immediately. However, if there's some procedures or some sort of medical processes they need to go through that are not available at the institution, or they can't bring someone in like a specialist to come in to perform that medical process at the institution, they will schedule medical trips on a monthly basis. And there's a review team that goes over those trips every month. And but this particular process was a little bit different because, as you know, most doctors' offices and most folks that do MRIs and X-rays and things of that nature, they're on a normal work schedule, between, the normal business hours of maybe 10 o'clock and maybe 6 p.m. So in that case, this was a little bit different, getting him outside the facility in the late evening hours to do just, possibly a basic MRI.
Yeah, I was thinking about the timeline too, because I don't ever recall going to the doctor at 10 p.m. at night. As you said, it's usually 9 to 5, 10 to 6 kind of vibes. But for P. Diddy, I can kind of understand why it was at 10 p.m. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking they decided to do this because he's such a high profile name that they wouldn't want to draw attention to it. I mean, this is an unassuming Thursday night around 10 p.m. Could that be why they decided?
The sound was final, cold, merciless. It was the sound of a man's freedom ending. Sean Diddy Combs, music mogul, entrepreneur, hip-hop legend, was no longer in control. No more private jets. No more luxury mansions. No more assistants whispering updates in his ear. Just the sound of his own breathing, echoing through the narrow hallway as guards led him to intake. His world of fame and power had been replaced by a world of fear, discipline, and survival. And insiders are now revealing that Diddy's first days inside those prison walls were far worse than anyone could have imagined: violent, chaotic, and filled with tension. They painted a disturbing picture of a man completely unprepared for what awaited him. The moment he arrived, Diddy's celebrity status became both a curse and a target. Inmates recognized him immediately. Some were curious, others were resentful, and a few wanted to test him. Prison isn't the kind of place where fame earns you respect. If anything, it makes you a bigger target. According to people close to the situation, the guards initially tried to keep Diddy isolated from the general population.
Decided then to go to the hospital?
Yes, and also, I mean, for a couple of reasons, staff. I mean, many correctional agencies are short-staffed, so you're taking someone out with this high-profile person such as P. Diddy. I mean, just the nature of who he is going to cause a serious security concern because you're going to need to be able to stave off, onlookers, fans, media, and the like. And then you also got to think about the security of the hospital and their operations. I mean, people are there to try to get better. You have families there to visit their loved ones. And the last thing you need is somewhat, a chaotic environment that's causing concern with security. And also, just, most people don't know this, but he's actually under the primary custody. He's a U.S., what we call a U.S. Marshals inmate because he's on pretrial status. So the Bureau, the agency, the Bureau of Prisons oversees, the operations with overseeing the inmates on a day-to-day basis. However, when they're in the hospital for an extended period of time, if there's no deal worked out between the local institution and the local marshal's office, it will be the marshal's responsibility to take custody of that particular inmate. So, but back to your original question, yes, he is definitely taken out at that time, and I'm sure this arrangement was made weeks in advance to make sure that that technician or that clinician was going to be available to take a look at whatever issues that he may be experiencing right now, so that way, there's not a whole lot of onlookers, and then even with staff and other inmates, it gives them not an opportunity to make a call, to their family. Hey, I think, Diddy's going out to the hospital right now. If anybody wants to take a look at him, head out there. And then I think the other thing, Sierra, is since there are no cameras in the courthouse throughout this process, we've only been getting the sketch artist views of their perspective of what he looks like. And I think people have been talking about him losing weight and different things of that nature. So I know folks will probably want to be able to get a photo of him to see what he actually looks like. And I mean, and if he does have issues with his legs, I mean, is he walking with a limp? Does he have a does he have a cane or anything like that? So yeah, I think that will be the reason why that they would make this, take this measure, which I have never seen in my career. Someone taken out to the hospital at this time of night for something as basic as an MRI.
Oh, that's interesting that this is the first time you've ever seen anything like this, because there have been high profile inmates at MDC in the past, maybe not to the level of P. Diddy. You had a lot of answers in that one answer, so many different roads I could go down. And I agree with you 100%. People would want that photo. We would be talking about that photo today if for some reason we got it. So that's a super valid point. I wanted to go back to the very beginning though, because how does all of this start? Does P. Diddy go to one of the corrections officers and say, hey, my knee's really bothering me, I'm not feeling well? Would he go to an infirmary on site? What would the early process look like?
So again, after that initial review of his current medical situation during his physical, and then there's follow up to that process if there's something found, immediately. But you have to understand, daily there are medical staff walking through the units, doing what we call sit call and asking inmates, are they okay? And then you have folks that are walking around passing out meds and different things of that nature. And then he can also reach out to the medical team by what we call an inmate to staff coordination
For safety reasons. But word spread quickly: Diddy's here. Within hours, the prison was buzzing. Inmates were talking about him in the yard, in the cafeteria, in the showers. Some wanted to see if he was really as tough as he claimed. Others wanted to make a name for themselves by taking him down. Sources say the tension started from day one. In processing, Diddy was stripped, searched, fingerprinted, and handed his standard issue jumpsuit. Gone were the designer clothes and diamond chains. Instead, he wore the same orange uniform as everyone else, and that, according to insiders, hit him hard. Witnesses said he looked distant, dazed, like someone who still hadn't accepted his new reality. But prison doesn't wait for you to adjust. The moment he was assigned to his cell block, he stepped into an entirely different world, one ruled by fear, loyalty, and survival. And that's when things began to spiral out of control. On his very first night, Diddy was reportedly confronted by a group of inmates who weren't impressed by his celebrity status. One insider claimed they wanted to test him, see if he'd break. They surrounded him, saying things like, "You think you're special, huh?"
Correspondence form, whether electronically or in writing, and he could say, "Hey, I've had chronic issues with my knee for several years, and I'm saying there's reports that after he ran New York City Marathon in 2003, that he had some ongoing issues with one of his knees." So that's how that initial process would start. And then and if it's nothing like emergent, because again, if his knee was bothering him to the point where he fell out or something like that in the evening, then obviously they would take him to the hospital right away. It wouldn't be a thing where they would schedule that out. But in terms of something that basic, that would have to be looked at well in advance, and then they would make that appointment and then reach out to the hospital staff and say, "Hey, you know, can you get someone that can, one, keep their mouth shut, that's going to be on schedule to work overtime or switch their schedule to do this particular procedure? Can they keep their mouth shut and not expose that, hey, we're going to bring him out into the community for a couple of hours to do this process?" So there had to be some high level planning, not just at the local institution and the local hospital, but obviously probably at the regional office level, and maybe even at the DOJ level, saying that, hey, this individual is going to be going out for a short period of time to make sure that they're taking care of these issues that he may or may not be having with his knee.
Yeah, the planning into all of this, based on what you're saying, does sound like it was pretty specific, that they wanted to make sure everything went through smoothly. And I wanted to ask you about the logistics. I know we've talked about this before, transporting Diddy to court, which we've seen him there several times. I mean, at least the sketches. Our reporter there has seen him in real life, but we've seen the sketches. As far as this goes, though, with him going to the hospital, is it different? I mean, would he be in his jumpsuit? Would he have cuffs? Would there be somebody with him at all times, even when he's in the MRI? What would that look like?
What would happen? He would definitely go out in his institutional jumpsuit. He would be handcuffed, leg irons, and what we call a Martin chain, which is the chains around your waist, handcuffs, and then the what we call a black box. That would be a little mechanism that would go over the handcuffs to make sure that he is not moving around necessarily. And I'm almost certain that they probably had 3 or 4 staff with him, and even possibly someone in a different vehicle, what we call a chase vehicle, just to make sure that everything is secure and everything is well in that regard. Now, in terms of the X-ray, I'm sure whatever cuffs that would need to be taken off for the X-ray to be done, accurately to do the process. I'm sure if they need to take off a little bit of the handcuffs or the chain or whatever, and depending on where they were going, I don't know if they would necessarily take off the leg irons, but they would make it to where he would be comfortable enough to make sure the medical procedure is done in the right way, and the staff would be right there with him at all time. No one would definitely not be leaving his side.
I'm glad that you brought up the handcuffs, because that was my first thought. Metal, MRI, we probably can't put those two together. But as you pointed out, there was probably several different corrections officers or staff with him at the time. So it sounds like that probably went through successfully and he was returned back to MDC. But let's say, for instance, P. Diddy needs another surgery. He's had, I think, 3 so far, and he's been suffering from this knee ailment for about 20 years at this point. You mentioned the New York.
You think your money means something here? Diddy, shaken but trying to keep calm, reportedly told them, "I'm just here to do my time." But that answer didn't sit well. The confrontation grew heated until guards intervened, separating everyone before it escalated further. But that was just the beginning. The next morning, Diddy reportedly woke up to find a note slipped under his cell door, a threat, handwritten, short, and direct. "You don't belong here, watch your back." He showed it to the guards, who immediately placed him under heightened observation. But inside prison, even the guards can't always protect you. Every hallway, every corner, every meal could turn dangerous in seconds. And within just 3 days, it did. According to sources familiar with the incident, a violent altercation broke out in the recreation area. It started as shouting, loud, echoing arguments, but quickly turned into chaos. Inmates rushed toward each other, fists flying, tables flipping. Diddy, who happened to be nearby, got caught in the middle of it. Witnesses claim he tried to back away, shouting for guards, but someone grabbed him from behind and threw a punch. The scene was pure madness. Guards blew their whistles, alarms
In this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District, in another case, basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but 3 warrant particular emphasis. 1, continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2, claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case, and 3, general issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated,
and inmates dropped to the floor, but Diddy wasn't spared. By the time officers regained control, he was on the ground, bruised, shaken, and terrified. He was escorted immediately to the medical wing, where he was treated for minor injuries, But the emotional toll was far deeper than any bruise. Those who saw him described him as broken, nervous, and completely out of his element. After that incident, prison officials made the decision to move him to protective custody, an isolated unit meant for inmates who are considered at risk. It was a move meant to protect him, but for Diddy, it only deepened the feeling of despair. Imagine going from living in mansions with armed security and private chefs to being locked alone in a tiny, windowless cell, with nothing but your thoughts. For a man used to being surrounded by noise, power, and attention, that silence was torture. Insiders say Diddy spends most of his days pacing the floor, barely eating, barely sleeping. He's reportedly paranoid, constantly asking guards what's being said about him, who's talking, who might be plotting.
I'm so sorry. But I'm committed to be a better man each and every day. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry.
2 days after that post, Crystal McKinney filed suit against Diddy, alleging he drugged her and sexually assaulted her back in 2003. All that brings us to September 11th, when singer Dawn Richard filed another civil suit against Diddy, alleging he touched her inappropriately, imprisoned her, and even threatened her life. All this leads us to Monday, September 16th, when Diddy is indicted by a grand jury on federal charges. At about 8:30 that night, he was taken into custody by Homeland Security at the Park Hyatt in New York. The indictment was unsealed on September 17th, charging Diddy with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The court doc details accusations dating back to 2009, alleging Diddy had a pattern of illegal activity over the course of more than a decade. And it's those alleged illegal activities that led us here to this federal indictment. To understand more, we now turn to criminal defense attorney Adam Conta. Okay, so this is a story we've been following for 6 months, more than that. Since the federal raids, we've been kind of seeing this coming, didn't really know when, and now the indictment finally came down. So just at that point, what are your initial thoughts about this indictment?
Well, I mean, I think it's a real problem for him. It lays out what they believe is a pattern of illegal activity, all in the names and the furtherance of the Combs enterprise. I think it lacks some details, but we have, because this is an ongoing investigation and because it's sort of been in the public sphere for a while, we have more details than we normally would. They've laid out a pattern of conspiracy and racketeering that they've charged him with. But part of that is obviously that one of the victims is his ex-girlfriend, Kathy, who filed this major lawsuit last year in November against him. But we kind of have the details from that lawsuit as well. So we can kind of insert those as really the jump off point to how we got here now today. But he's got some real legal challenges ahead of him. Absolutely.
Talking about the indictment really quick before we go into the timeline, I was kind of surprised at the length of it. It's only about 14 pages. There's only 3 charges. And as you said, there's not that much information in it. So is it possible that the feds are going to add more, or what would that look like?
It could be, but the fact that there's racketeering involved, I mean, what racketeering essentially is that the federal government thinks that they can prove that he broke 2 specific laws in this sort of group of 35 that make up these kind of racketeering eligible charges. And so if they can get over that hurdle, even though there are only 3 counts, and I was surprised too that it wasn't a lengthier indictment with a lot more detail in it, the counts that are there are enough to put him in jail for a long time. And we can't gloss over the fact that there were a couple defaced AR-15s there. There was an unknown amount of narcotics there, including meth and other prescription drugs that were illegally obtained, allegedly. And so I think what the public is going to be looking for is a lot of details on the sex trafficking, on the kidnapping, but mostly on the sex-related crimes. That's kind of what the public likes to sink their teeth into. And I'm sure we're going to be hearing the term freak offs a lot over the coming days and weeks, because that's the soundbite that you immediately get from this indictment. But if you're looking for more details on sort of the torrid and terrible things he's done to these alleged victims over the years, then the indictment does not have a lot of explanation there.
You brought up a good point about the pattern, showing that Diddy had a...
He's scared, one source said bluntly. He's never been this scared in his life. And the other inmates? They haven't forgotten him. Word travels fast in prison. And some see Diddy's isolation as proof that he's weak. Others are angry that he's getting special treatment. That combination makes him even more of a target. Meanwhile, Diddy's legal team is scrambling. His lawyers have filed urgent motions, arguing that their client's safety is in jeopardy. They've requested a transfer to a different facility, one with higher security and less violence. But these things take time, and time, in Diddy's situation, is dangerous. Behind the scenes, his family is reportedly panicking. His loved ones, especially his children, have been trying to visit him, but visitation rights in his current unit are limited. Sources claim that one of his daughters broke down during a recent call, pleading with him to hold on. But Diddy's mental state is deteriorating fast. People close to him say he's not the same man anymore. The confidence, the bravado, the charisma, all of it is gone. He speaks quietly, almost fearfully. He's reportedly told his lawyer, "I can't do this. I don't belong here." For someone who once ruled an empire, it's a devastating fall. And what makes it worse is that this is just the beginning. His sentence is long. And if these first days are any indication, the road ahead will be brutal. Insiders also revealed something even more disturbing, that the prison staff themselves are struggling to manage the tension around him. Some guards reportedly don't trust Diddy's presence, fearing that it attracts too much media attention and makes their jobs harder. Others are wary of the inmates targeting him. It's chaos waiting to happen. One correctional officer admitted, "You put someone like that in here, and it changes the whole balance." And while Diddy's legal team continues to fight for a transfer, it's unclear if they'll succeed. Transfers aren't guaranteed. They take months, sometimes longer. Until then, Diddy is stuck, living every day with the fear that another attack could come at any moment. He's learned fast that prison isn't about surviving weeks or months. It's about surviving every single day, every hour, every minute. And even then, survival doesn't mean peace. It means constant fear. The man who once told the world can't stop, won't stop now finds himself praying just to make it through another night. And the world outside? It's watching. The same fans who once idolized him are now divided, some saying he's finally facing the consequences of his actions, others saying he's being torn apart by a system that wants to see him suffer. But no matter where you stand, one thing is clear: the legend of Diddy is being rewritten, not in music charts or business headlines, but in the dark, violent corridors of a prison where no one cares who you used to be. The insider's reports are chilling. Diddy's first days behind bars weren't just difficult, they were a full-blown nightmare. Violence, isolation, paranoia, and fear now define his reality. Every move he makes is watched, every whisper echoes, and as the days drag on, one question lingers in the air. Can Diddy survive long enough for his appeal to come through, or has his empire truly met its end behind those bars?